You can't do this to me. I've invested 3 years of my life in you." That's what my husband screamed when he realized the $2.3 million inheritance he'd been planning to steal was gone. But what he said next made my blood run cold. "I knew exactly how much you were worth before I ever said hello to you at that charity auction. Our entire marriage, every kiss, every I love you, every tender moment, had been an elaborate con job." He'd researched my family's wealth, targeted me when I was grieving, and spent 3 years setting up the perfect financial trap. But here's what my cheating husband and his 26-year-old mistress didn't know. While they were planning to rob me blind, I was planning my own revenge. Let me tell you how a woman who believed in fairy tale love discovered that some people will marry you, hold you every night, and methodically plan to destroy you. And how I made sure the only thing he walked away with was a lesson he'll never forget. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story, I need your help. This channel is brand new and I'm putting my heart and soul into bringing you the most compelling real-life revenge stories. If you're already hooked by this opening, hitting that subscribe button, giving this video a massive thumbs up, and sharing it with someone who loves jaw-dropping drama would mean the absolute world to me. It's completely free and helps me keep creating these stories for you. Also, drop a comment and let me know, have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Because this story is all about trusting those instincts. Now let's get into what happened. My name is Amelia. I'm 34 years old, work as a marketing director at a mid-size firm in Portland, and until 8 months ago, I thought I was living the perfect marriage. But let me back up 6 years, to when my life changed forever. I inherited my grandmother's vineyard in the Willamette Valley, along with $2.3 million when she passed away. I was 28, completely devastated by losing the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, and honestly overwhelmed by suddenly having more money than I'd ever dreamed of. My grandmother, Rose, had built that vineyard from nothing. She'd started with 5 acres and a dream in 1962, and by the time she passed, it was one of the most respected boutique wineries in Oregon. The money came from selling off some of the land for development, but she'd kept the heart of the vineyard, the original 30 acres with the tasting room and the main house where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. I was grieving, lost, and frankly terrified of the responsibility. That's when I met David at a wine charity auction at the Portland Art Museum. I was standing alone by the silent auction table, probably looking as miserable as I felt, when this incredibly charming, confident man in a perfectly tailored navy suit approached me. "You look like someone who needs rescuing from small talk," he said with this devastating smile, offering me a glass of wine. "Want to escape to somewhere quiet and tell me why you look like you'd rather be anywhere else?" David was 33 then, tall with dark hair and these intense blue eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was a financial advisor with his own practice, successful, sophisticated, and he had this way of making everything feel effortless. We ended up talking until 2 a.m. in his car in the museum parking lot. I found myself telling him everything, about my grandmother, about feeling lost and overwhelmed, about not knowing what to do with this inheritance that felt more like a burden than a blessing. "Money doesn't define who you are," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I don't care if you're worth $2 or $2 million. I want to know you. The real you." Those words felt like a lifeline. Here was this successful, gorgeous man who said my money didn't matter to him, who seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not as a bank account with legs. David pursued me like I was the most fascinating woman on earth. Flowers delivered to my office with handwritten notes. Surprise picnics in the vineyard. Long walks through Portland's Rose Garden where he'd listen to me talk about my dreams and fears for hours. "I've never met anyone like you," he'd tell me, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're real in a way most people aren't. No pretense, no games. Just genuine." I fell hard and fast. This was the kind of love I dreamed about, passionate, all-consuming, the kind that makes you believe in happily ever after. The proposal came 8 months later, right there in my grandmother's vineyard during harvest season. The late afternoon light was filtering through the grape leaves, turning everything golden, when David dropped to one knee among the vines. Amelia Rose, he said, using the full name only my grandmother had called me. I want to build a life with you. Not because of what you have, but because of who you are. Because you make me want to be a better man. I said yes through tears, and he slipped my grandmother's ring on my finger, the one I'd inherited, a vintage Art Deco piece that had belonged to her mother. But here's the thing I should have paid more attention to, what happened during our engagement. Suddenly, David became very interested in my financial setup. For tax purposes, he explained with the authority of someone who did this professionally, it's actually much better if you keep your inheritance completely separate. Trust me, this is what I do for a living. He connected me with his colleague, this smooth-talking financial planner named Richard, who recommended setting up specific trusts and account structures. This way, David said, no one can ever say I married you for your money. It stays completely yours, completely protected. It sounded so thoughtful, so protective, so romantic, even. I want everyone to know I chose you for you, he'd say, kissing my forehead. Not for what your grandmother left you. Richard set everything up exactly as David specified. Separate accounts, specific trust structures, detailed documentation keeping everything in my name only. At the time, I thought David was being incredibly considerate, making sure his motives could never be questioned. Now I realize he was setting up the perfect con. The first year of marriage was everything I'd dreamed of. David was attentive, romantic, the kind of husband who brought me coffee in bed every morning and left little love notes in my laptop bag. We'd spend weekends at the vineyard, David learning about wine production, talking about maybe expanding the operation someday. I love watching you light up when you talk about this place, he'd say. Your grandmother would be so proud of what you're doing here. He seemed genuinely interested in the vineyard, asking intelligent questions about soil composition and harvest timing. He even suggested some marketing strategies that actually increased our sales. For a while, I thought we made the perfect team. But somewhere around year 2, subtle shifts started happening. David's financial advisory practice was struggling. The market was tough, he was losing clients to bigger firms with more resources, and I could see him getting increasingly frustrated. At first, I tried to be supportive. When he'd come home stressed about a deal falling through or a client leaving, I'd listen, offer encouragement, suggest we take a weekend trip to decompress. But that's when the comments started. We'd be out to dinner at some nice restaurant, nothing too fancy, maybe $200 for both of us, and I'd casually hand over my card without thinking twice. David's jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly. Must be nice, he'd mutter under his breath. What's nice? I'd ask. Nothing. Just, must be nice to never worry about a bill. At first, I thought he was just stressed about work. I tried to be more sensitive, maybe asking if he wanted to split checks or suggesting less expensive places. But that seemed to make him even more irritated. I don't need you to pay for cheaper dinners, Amelia, he'd snap. I can afford to take my wife out to eat. But then when I did pay for nice places, he'd get that tight look around his eyes. When I suggested a $5,000 vacation to Italy for our second anniversary, David was initially enthusiastic. But when it came time to book, he hesitated. Maybe we should do something more modest, he said. I'd like to contribute more equally. David, we're married, I said. What's mine is ours. I want to take this trip together. But it's not really ours, is it? He replied quietly. It's yours. Your money, your decision, your generosity that makes it possible. I didn't know what to say to that. I'd never wanted him to feel like a kept man, but I also didn't want to pretend I didn't have resources that could make our life better. The resentment grew slowly, like a poison spreading through our marriage. When his car needed expensive repairs, I offered to help. I don't need your charity, he said coldly. When I bought him a nice watch for his birthday, he accused me of showing off our financial imbalance. When I mentioned maybe updating the kitchen in our house, he said, why ask me? You'll just pay for whatever you want anyway. Around this time, David started spending a lot of time with his new best friend, Marcus, a recently divorced lawyer who, according to David, had finally gotten what he deserved from his cheating ex-wife. Marcus is brilliant, David would say after their guy nights out. He understood exactly how to protect himself legally. The guy went from being taken advantage of to being financially secure for life. Protect himself from what? I asked. From being screwed over by someone who thought they could use him and then throw him away, David replied with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Marcus started coming around more often. They'd disappear into David's home office for hours, talking in low voices that would stop the moment I walked by. When I'd ask what they were discussing, David would wave me off. Just business stuff. Investment strategies. But something felt wrong about their friendship. The way Marcus looked at me, like he was evaluating something. The way conversations would halt when I entered a room. The way David started asking seemingly innocent questions about my finances. How exactly is your trust structured? He'd ask over breakfast. Who manages your investment accounts? What happens to the vineyard if something happens to you? I'm just trying to understand our complete financial picture, he'd explain when I questioned the sudden interest. For planning purposes. You know, in case we want to buy a bigger house someday, or start a family. That made sense. We'd been talking about both those things. But then I found the business cards. I was looking for gum in David's gym bag when I found them. 3 different divorce attorney business cards tucked into a side pocket. My hands started shaking as I stared at them. When I confronted David, he didn't even blink. Oh, those are for Marcus, he said smoothly. He's been networking, helping some colleagues who are going through rough divorces. He asked me to grab some cards from that legal conference I went to last month. It sounded reasonable. But something deep in my gut was screaming that this explanation was wrong. Why would Marcus need you to get him divorce attorney cards? I pressed. He's a lawyer himself. Different specialties, David said with a shrug. Marcus does corporate law. These guys specialize in family court. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted so badly to believe that my husband wasn't secretly collecting divorce attorney contact information. But that night, lying in bed next to David, listening to him breathe, I had the most terrifying thought of my life. What if he's planning to leave me? And right behind that thought came an even more chilling realization. What if this whole marriage has been about my money from the very beginning? I try to push these thoughts away. This was David, the man who'd held me while I grieved my grandmother, who'd learned everything about wine just to share my passion, who told me he loved me every single day. But once the doubt took root, I couldn't stop noticing things. How David's questions about my finances were getting more specific, more probing. How he'd started suggesting we update our financial planning, maybe streamline some of our accounts. How Marcus had become a constant presence in our lives, always steering conversations toward marriage finances and protecting yourself legally. How David had become increasingly secretive about his phone calls and computer usage. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening in October. I came home from work to find David in his office with the door closed, talking in an urgent whisper. I could hear bits and pieces. Community property laws. She has no idea. Once everything's in motion. When I knocked on the door, the conversation stopped abruptly. Just finishing up a client call, David said when he opened the door, but his face was flushed and he wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If David was planning something, I needed to know what it was. And if I was just being paranoid, I needed proof of that too. Because living in limbo, wondering if the man I loved was plotting against me, was slowly killing me inside. I spent 3 sleepless nights trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. David loved me. We'd built a life together. He couldn't be planning to betray me. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. David had been showing me resentment about money for months. Showing me anger about my independence. Showing me that he felt entitled to what I'd inherited from a woman he'd never even met. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own husband. First, I called my college roommate Lisa, who'd gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier. Lisa, I need advice, I said during our lunch meeting. How did you know for sure that Tom was cheating? Lisa's expression immediately became serious. Amelia, what's going on? Is David? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe. I'm probably just being paranoid, but some things feel off. Lisa leaned forward. Tell me everything. I laid out all my concerns, the secretive behavior, The questions about finances, the divorce attorney cards, Marcus's suspicious influence. As I talked, Lisa's frown deepened. "Honey," she said when I finished, "you're not being paranoid. You're being smart. And I know exactly who you need to call." That's how I met Rebecca Chin, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Rebecca was nothing like what I'd expected. She was probably my age, professional but warm, with kind eyes that had clearly seen too much human betrayal. "I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind," I said during our initial consultation at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. I explained everything again. David's behavioral changes, the financial questions, my growing suspicion that something was very wrong in my marriage. Rebecca listened without judgment, taking detailed notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How long has this behavior been going on?" she finally asked. "About 6 months, maybe a little longer." "It's been gradual." "And your inheritance, you mentioned it's kept completely separate from marital assets?" "Yes. David insisted on that structure when we got married. Said it was better for tax purposes." Rebecca's eyebrows raised slightly. "Your husband set up the legal structure to keep your inheritance separate?" The way she said it made my stomach drop. "Is that unusual?" "It's not unheard of, but it's interesting. Most financial advisors would recommend some integration for married couples, for estate planning purposes, if nothing else." She leaned back in her chair. "Amelia, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Your instincts are telling you something's wrong, and in my experience, those instincts are usually right. Give me 2 weeks. If there's nothing to find, you'll have peace of mind. If there is something, you'll find it. I'll find it." Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to act completely normal around David while inside. I was dying. Every kiss felt like a lie. Every "I love you" felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. David seemed increasingly agitated during this time. He brought up our finances more frequently, always casually, always with some reasonable explanation. "I've been thinking about our long-term financial strategy," he said one evening while we were cooking dinner together. "Maybe it's time we consolidated some of our accounts, made things more efficient." My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean by consolidate?" "Well, you have all these separate accounts and trusts. It's complicated for tax purposes. Maybe we should simplify, put some things under joint management." "But you said separation was better for tax purposes when we got married." David's smile was tight. "Tax laws change, honey. What was smart 3 years ago might not be optimal now." Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. I'd agree to think about it or look into it, buying myself time while Rebecca did her investigation. Meanwhile, Marcus's visits became even more frequent. He'd come over for dinner, ostensibly as a friend, but the conversation always seemed to steer toward financial planning, estate management, the wisdom of couples sharing financial responsibilities. "You know, Amelia," Marcus said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, "I see a lot of married couples in my practice who get into trouble because they maintain too much financial independence. Creates trust issues." "What kind of trust issues?" I asked, genuinely curious about where he was going with this. "Well, when one spouse controls all the resources, it can make the other spouse feel excluded, unvalued. Sometimes that leads to resentment that damages the marriage." David nodded seriously. "That's exactly what I've been thinking about lately." I wanted to throw my wine glass at both of them, but instead I just smiled and said, "That's interesting. I'd never thought about it that way." The performance was exhausting. Then Rebecca called. "We need to meet," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And Amelia?" "Pack tissues." When we met the next day at the same coffee shop, Rebecca slid a manila folder across the table. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You were right to trust your instincts." My hands were shaking as I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a photograph of David and a young blonde woman holding hands outside a restaurant I didn't recognize. "Her name is Jessica Martinez," Rebecca explained gently. "She's 26, works as a paralegal at Marcus's law firm. They've been seeing each other for approximately 4 months. For months. While David was telling me he loved me every day, planning our anniversary trip, making love to me every week, he was with someone else. But that wasn't even the worst part. There's more, Rebecca continued. They signed a lease together 2 weeks ago. 1-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District. Expensive area. She showed me copies of the lease agreement. David's signature right there next to Jessica's, bold as anything. How did you get this? I asked. Property records are public. I also have some audio recordings that I think you need to hear. Rebecca pulled out a small recorder. Jessica left her phone unattended at a bar where she was meeting David. I was able to place a listening device temporarily. She pressed play, and David's voice filled the space between us. Once I file for divorce and get half her assets, we'll be set for life. 2.3 million plus the vineyard? Baby, we're talking about never having to worry about money again. Jessica's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. I can't believe she hasn't figured it out yet. You're such a good actor, babe. Marcus has it all mapped out. File first, claim financial hardship because my business is struggling, demand spousal support, and half of everything. Oregon's laws are pretty favorable if you play the victim card right. What if she fights it? She won't. Amelia's too soft, too trusting. She'll probably just agree to whatever we ask for to avoid conflict. And even if she does fight, Marcus says we have a solid case. All that money she spent on vacations and dinners? That shows the inheritance was treated as marital property. The recording went on for another 10 minutes. David and Jessica planning their new life together, discussing which of my assets they were most looking forward to spending, laughing about how naive and trusting I was. I sat in that coffee shop, listening to my husband plan my financial destruction with his mistress, and something inside me broke. Not just my heart, that had been cracking for months, but something deeper. My faith in love, in marriage, in the basic human decency of the person who'd promised to cherish me. How long have they been planning this? I whispered. Rebecca's expression was grim. Based on what I've uncovered, I believe David began researching your family's wealth before your first meeting. The room started spinning. What do you mean? I found records of internet searches from David's computer, dating back 4 years. Searches for information about your grandmother's estate, your family's vineyard, details about Rose Patterson's assets and will. All dated weeks before the charity auction where you met. The charity auction. Where David had approached me, seemingly by chance, when I was vulnerable and grieving. He targeted me, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I'm afraid so. This appears to have been a long-term plan from the very beginning. I don't remember driving home that day. I don't remember what I said to David when he asked about my day. I just remember sitting on our couch that evening, watching him flip through Netflix options and thinking, I've been living with a stranger for 3 years. Every romantic memory was now tainted. Every I love you was now a lie. Every tender moment had been part of an elaborate performance designed to secure my trust until he was ready to destroy me. That night, as David kissed me goodnight and told me he loved me, I smiled and said I loved him too. But inside, I was already planning my own strategy. Because if David thought he was going to steal my grandmother's legacy and run off with his little paralegal, he had seriously underestimated the woman he'd married. My grandmother hadn't built a successful vineyard by being naive and trusting. And she hadn't raised me to be a victim. It was time to show David exactly what happens when you try to con a woman who's figured out your game. If you're finding this story as fascinating and infuriating as I hoped you would, please consider hitting that like button, sharing this with someone who loves revenge stories, and dropping a comment about whether you think Amelia should have confronted David directly or if she was smart to plan her counterattack. Your engagement really helps me know I'm creating content you want to see more of. The next morning, while David was at work, and now I knew he might actually be apartment hunting with Jessica, I called Patricia Hoffman, the estate attorney Rebecca had recommended. I need an emergency consultation, I said. I believe my husband is planning to divorce me and steal my inheritance, and I need to know how to protect myself. Patricia was able to see me that afternoon. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel like I was finally dealing with someone who understood the gravity of my situation. Tell me about your current asset structure, she said after I'd explained the basic situation. I showed her all the documents David had helped me set up through his colleague Richard. As she reviewed them, her frown deepened. Amelia, This is concerning, she said finally. What do you mean? Well, technically speaking, your inheritance is separate property under Oregon law. But the way these accounts and trusts are structured, there are several vulnerabilities that could be exploited in a divorce. My heart sank. What kind of vulnerabilities? Did you ever use inheritance funds for joint marital expenses? Vacations, home improvements, anything that benefited both you and your husband. The Italy trip. The car down payment. David's business loan when his practice was struggling. Countless dinners, date nights, gifts. I'd been generous with my inheritance because I thought we were building a life together. Yes, I admitted. Quite a bit, actually. Patricia nodded grimly. That's called commingling. When separate property is used for marital purposes, it can become vulnerable to division in a divorce. And based on these documents, whoever set this up created multiple opportunities for that argument to be made. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. David set this up. His colleague Richard helped structure everything. I see. Patricia's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. So your husband, as a financial advisor, recommended a structure that would make your separate property more vulnerable in a potential divorce. He's been planning this from the beginning, hasn't he? It certainly appears that way. The good news is we can fix this. But we need to move quickly. What can we do? We can set up an irrevocable family trust, transfer all of your assets into it with a family member as co-trustee. Once that's done, those assets would be completely protected from any divorce proceedings. How quickly can we do this? Patricia looked surprised at my urgency. If you're serious about this, we could have everything completed within the week. But Amelia, this is a major step. Once assets go into an irrevocable trust, you can't simply change your mind. Do it, I said without hesitation. All of it. The vineyard, the investment accounts, the savings, everything. You'll need a co-trustee. Someone you trust completely. My sister Emma. She lives in San Francisco, but she'll do it. That afternoon, I called Emma and explained everything. The affair, the financial manipulation, the recorded conversations, the long-term planning. Oh my God, Amelia, Emma said, her voice shaking with anger. I never liked David, but this is psychopathic. I need you to be co-trustee of an emergency trust to protect grandmother's legacy, I said. Can you fly up this weekend? I'm booking a flight right now. Amelia, I'm so proud of you for figuring this out and protecting yourself. Grandmother would be proud too. That week was the most stressful of my life. I had to maintain perfect normalcy while secretly transferring millions of dollars out of accounts David knew about. Every phone call with Patricia had to be hidden. Every document had to be stored somewhere David would never find it. Meanwhile, David's pressure was intensifying. I've been thinking more about consolidating our finances, he announced Thursday evening. I actually made an appointment with Richard for Monday. We should restructure everything, get more tax efficient. My blood ran cold. Monday was too soon. The trust wouldn't be finalized until Tuesday. Actually, I've been swamped at work, I said carefully. Can we push it back a week or two? David's jaw tightened slightly. Amelia, this is important. We can't keep putting off our financial planning indefinitely. I know. It's just bad timing with this big campaign launch I'm managing. You always have some work excuse, he said, and for the first time, I heard real irritation in his voice. Don't you think our marriage should be a priority too? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, making me feel guilty for not wanting to hand over my inheritance to someone planning to steal it. Of course our marriage is a priority, I said. That's why I want to make sure I can give this the attention it deserves. Can we shoot for the week after? David stared at me for a long moment, and I wondered if he could see through my performance. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure, honey. Whatever works for you. But I could tell he was suspicious now. And that made everything more dangerous. Emma flew up that Friday, ostensibly for a sister weekend. David seemed pleased that I was spending time with family, even suggested some restaurants we should try. It's good that you're maintaining close family relationships, he said, kissing my cheek as Emma and I headed out Saturday morning. Family is important. If only he knew that family was about to save me from his betrayal. While David thought we were wine tasting and shopping, Emma and I were actually meeting with Patricia, signing documents, and setting up the most comprehensive asset protection strategy possible. Once these transfers are complete, Patricia explained, your inheritance will be completely untouchable. Your husband could demand it in a divorce, but legally you won't own it anymore. The trust will. What if he challenges it? He can try, but irrevocable trusts are exactly that, irrevocable. Especially when they're set up for legitimate purposes like family wealth preservation. And based on what you've told me about his timeline, we'll have everything finalized well before he files any paperwork. Sunday evening, as Emma prepared to fly back to San Francisco, she hugged me tightly. You're stronger than you know, she whispered. And you're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Monday and Tuesday crawled by. David seemed increasingly agitated, making more comments about financial planning, asking probing questions about my day, even checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Everything okay? I asked Tuesday evening after catching him scrolling through my text messages. Just wanted to see if you'd heard back from your dentist about that appointment, he said smoothly. But his explanation didn't make sense. I hadn't texted anyone about a dentist appointment. That night, David was more affectionate than he'd been in weeks. He brought me wine, gave me a long massage, whispered sweet things in my ear. All I could think was, you're trying to butter me up so you can rob me tomorrow. Wednesday morning, Patricia called. It's done, she said. Everything has been successfully transferred into the trust. You're fully protected. I hung up the phone and felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd saved myself from financial ruin. Sadness that my marriage had come to this, that the man I'd loved and trusted had been planning to destroy me all along. That evening, David came home with flowers and an expensive bottle of champagne. What's the celebration? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew. Can't a husband celebrate his beautiful wife just because, he said, pulling me into his arms and spinning me around the kitchen. But there was something different in his eyes. A kind of excited energy that made my skin crawl. As we sat on the couch that evening, David unusually attentive and romantic, I kept thinking, you have no idea what's coming for you. I had finished protecting my assets with exactly 24 hours to spare. Because the next morning, David struck. Thursday morning started like any other. David kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, said he had back-to-back client meetings all day. I went to work, attended my usual marketing team meeting, and tried to focus on campaign strategies while my stomach churned with anticipation. At 2:47 p.m., my assistant knocked on my office door. Amelia, there's a man here who says he needs to serve you with legal documents. Even though I'd been expecting this, my heart still stopped. Everyone in the office was watching as I walked to the lobby where a stern-looking man in a cheap suit was waiting with an envelope. Amelia Richardson? Yes, you've been served. The whispers started immediately. In our open-plan office, privacy was non-existent, and Amelia got served divorce papers would be around the entire company within an hour. I waited until I was in my car in the parking garage to open the envelope, my hands shaking despite knowing what I'd find. The paperwork was extensive, much more detailed than I'd expected. David hadn't just filed for divorce. He'd filed for an emergency financial injunction to prevent me from hiding or disposing of marital assets. His list of demands made my blood boil. 50% of all inherited assets acquired during the marriage and treated as marital property. Full ownership of the vineyard due to plaintiff's extensive contributions to its management and success. $8,000 per month in spousal support for 7 years. Half of all investment accounts. Reimbursement for his financial contributions to defendant's lifestyle. Attorney fees and court costs. At the bottom was a handwritten note from David. I hope we can work this out without making things ugly for both of us. You know I still care about you. I sat in that parking garage and laughed until I cried. The audacity was breathtaking. David was demanding half of money he'd never earned, claiming ownership of a vineyard that had been in my family for 60 years, and asking for spousal support despite having a higher salary than me when we married. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text after text from David. I know you're upset, but this is for the best. We both know this marriage hasn't been working. I still care about you, but we need to be realistic about our future. I hope you'll consider what's fair for both of us." Each message was more manipulative than the last, designed to make me feel guilty for his betrayal, to make me believe this was somehow a mutual decision rather than a calculated attack. I didn't respond to any of them. That evening, David didn't come home. I later learned he'd moved directly into the Pearl District apartment with Jessica, timing his departure to coincide with serving me papers. They'd been planning this transition for months. But while they were probably celebrating their brilliant strategy with champagne and congratulating themselves on their perfect plan, I was making final preparations for what would be the most satisfying moment of my life. Friday morning, Marcus called me directly. "Amelia, I'm calling as David's friend," he said in his smoothest lawyer voice. "I know this is difficult, but David really wants to handle this amicably. Maybe we could all sit down and work something out without letting lawyers get too involved." "That's thoughtful of you to offer, Marcus," I replied sweetly. "But I think I'll let my attorney handle the legal aspects." Of course. I just hate to see two people I care about go through an ugly divorce when a reasonable settlement is possible." The fake concern was nauseating. This was the man who'd been coaching David on how to steal from me for months. "I'm sure everything will work out fairly," I said. "I hope so. David's a good man, Amelia. He deserves to be treated fairly after everything he's contributed to your marriage." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The mediation was scheduled for the following Monday. David's legal team, Marcus and his associate, a sharp-faced woman named Caroline, had sent over a detailed settlement proposal that was somehow even more outrageous than the original filing. They wanted me to transfer half the vineyard immediately, liquidate investment accounts to provide David with cash, and sign a 7-year spousal support agreement that would total nearly $700,000. Their cover letter explained their reasoning. David had sacrificed his career advancement to support my inherited business interests. He'd provided extensive emotional and practical support during my difficult adjustment to wealth. He deserved equitable compensation for his investment in the marriage. The rewriting of history was masterful. According to their narrative, I was a selfish heiress who'd taken advantage of a devoted husband's love and support. David was the victim, just a good man who'd loved me through my difficulties and deserved his fair share of the wealth he'd helped me manage. I played my part perfectly in the days leading up to mediation. I hired Jennifer Walsh, a competent but not particularly aggressive divorce attorney, someone who would seem overwhelmed by Marcus's legal maneuvering. I acted stressed, upset, like a woman struggling to understand how her perfect marriage had fallen apart. "I just want this to be over," I told Jennifer during our preparation meeting. "I don't want a long, ugly fight." "I understand," Jennifer said, "but their demands are quite excessive. We should push back on several points. Maybe we could meet somewhere in the middle?" I suggested, playing the role of the emotionally exhausted wife who just wanted peace. Jennifer looked concerned. "Amelia, you don't have to give them everything they're asking for. You have rights too." "I know. I loved him, you know? If some money will help him move on and be happy, maybe it's worth it." I could see Jennifer making mental notes. Emotional client, likely to settle for too much, needs protection from her own generous impulses. Perfect. Monday morning, I dressed carefully for mediation. Black suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to look serious, but not intimidating, sad but not bitter. David was already there when I arrived at the mediator's office, wearing his best charcoal suit, the one I'd bought him for his birthday 18 months ago. He looked confident, almost triumphant, flanked by Marcus and Caroline. Jessica was there too, sitting in the back row like she was watching a movie. She was younger and prettier than I'd expected, with long blonde hair and the kind of figure that probably made men trip over themselves to help her. She kept checking her phone and whispering to David during breaks, completely shameless about her role in destroying my marriage. "Amelia," David said as I sat down, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I hope we can handle this with dignity." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The audacity of him talking about dignity while his mistress sat 10 feet away was breathtaking. The mediator, a tired-looking man in his 60s, began by outlining the basic process. Then Caroline stood up to present David's case. She was good, I'll give her that. She painted a picture of David as a devoted husband who'd subordinated his own career interests to support me through the emotional and practical challenges of managing inherited wealth. She presented evidence of David's contributions to our household, grocery receipts, utility bills, documentation of his salary contributions to our joint checking account. She had photographs of David working at the vineyard during harvest season, testimonials from vineyard employees about his dedication and expertise. She presented a detailed analysis of how my inheritance funds had been spent on joint marital assets, the Italy vacation, dinners out, gifts, home improvements, even David's business loan. My client has invested 3 years of his life and career in this marriage, Caroline concluded. He provided emotional support, practical assistance, and financial contribution while Mrs. Richardson maintained exclusive control over significant assets. Oregon law recognizes the right to equitable distribution of assets that have been treated as marital property, and the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Richardson's inheritance has been thoroughly integrated into the marital estate. Through it all, I sat quietly, occasionally dabbing at my eyes with tissues, letting my lawyer make weak objections that David's team easily countered. I could see David relaxing, getting more confident. This was going exactly according to their plan. Jennifer made a half-hearted defense, pointing out that inheritance is typically separate property, but Caroline had responses prepared for every argument. The documentation was overwhelming, the legal strategy was sound, and I appeared to be an emotional wreck who just wanted the ordeal to be over. Perhaps we could take a short recess, the mediator suggested, and let Mrs. Richardson's counsel review the evidence more thoroughly. That's when Jennifer stood up and reached into her briefcase. Actually, she said calmly, before we discuss any asset division, I think everyone needs to review these documents. She handed manila folders to everyone in the room. I watched David's face as he opened his folder and saw the first page, Irrevocable Family Trust, Asset Transfer Documentation. His confident smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. Then his face went white as he flipped through page after page of legal documents. What is this? Caroline demanded, her professional composure cracking slightly. These documents detail the transfer of all assets mentioned in your settlement demands into an irrevocable family trust, Jennifer explained, her voice steady and professional. The trust was established 3 weeks ago with Mrs. Richardson's sister as co-trustee. All transfers were completed prior to the filing of divorce papers and are fully legal and binding. The silence in that room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, papers rustling, Jessica's sharp intake of breath from the back row. David's face had gone from white to green. He was flipping through the documents frantically, looking at dates, signatures, notarizations. This can't be legal, Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. You can't just hide assets to avoid divorce settlement. We're not hiding anything, Jennifer replied calmly. Mrs. Richardson has placed her family's generational wealth into a family trust for preservation purposes. This is a completely legitimate estate planning strategy that was implemented before any divorce proceedings began. Caroline was reading through the documents with growing horror, clearly realizing that their entire case had just evaporated. The vineyard, the investment accounts, the inheritance funds, none of these are owned by Mrs. Richardson anymore, Jennifer continued. They're held in trust for the benefit of the Patterson family legacy. As these assets are not marital property and are not owned by either party to this divorce, they cannot be subject to property division. That's when David lost it completely. You planned this, he screamed, jumping up so fast his chair fell backward. You knew I was going to file and you deliberately moved everything to prevent me from getting what I deserve. The mask was completely off now. No more fake concern. No more pretense of caring about our marriage. Just pure, naked greed and rage. I've invested 3 years of my life in you. 3 years. You can't just steal my future like this. His future. Not our future. His future. You think you're so smart, don't you? He continued, his voice shaking with rage. You have no idea how long I've been planning this. I researched your family, your grandmother's will, everything about you before I ever said hello at that charity auction. The confession hit the room like a bomb. Even the mediator looked shocked. I knew exactly how much you were worth, what kind of assets you'd inherited, what your vulnerabilities were. I crafted every conversation, every romantic gesture, every moment of our relationship to get you to trust me. Jessica had gone pale and was edging toward the door, clearly realizing this wasn't going the way they'd planned. I spent months setting up the perfect financial structure to make your inheritance vulnerable in a divorce. I documented every penny you spent on joint expenses. I built the perfect case to take half of everything you had. Marcus was frantically trying to calm David down, but David was beyond rational thought. And you ruined it. You ruined everything. I could have been set for life. We could have been set for life. He gestured wildly toward Jessica, who was now standing by the door looking like she wanted to run. I gave up everything for this plan. I spent 3 years pretending to love you, pretending to care about your stupid vineyard and your dead grandmother's legacy, all so I could take what I deserved. The room was silent except for David's heavy breathing and the sound of Jessica's heels clicking as she walked out the door. Apparently, when there's no money to steal, mistresses lose interest very quickly. David noticed Jessica leaving and his rage turned to panic. "Jessica, wait," he called after her, but she was gone. He turned back to me, his expression cycling between fury and desperation. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I gave you 3 years of my life. 3 years. You owe me something for that." That's when I finally spoke. "David," I said quietly, looking him directly in the eyes, "if you'd actually loved me, you wouldn't be here demanding payment for it." Stories like this take incredible courage to share, and I want to bring you more of them. If you're as shocked by David's complete meltdown as I was researching this story, hitting that subscribe button, smashing that like button, and sharing this with someone who needs to hear it tells me you want more content like this. Plus, you'll never miss the ending of these incredible stories. Comment below, do you think David got what he deserved, or was Amelia too harsh? I love reading your perspectives on these situations. The mediation ended with Marcus quietly requesting a recess to reassess their client's position. But everyone in that room knew there was no position to reassess. The trust was ironclad, the asset transfers were legal and complete, and David was left with exactly what he'd brought to our marriage, nothing. As we walked out of the building, David caught up with me in the parking garage. "Amelia, wait," he said, his voice completely different now, smaller, desperate. "Please, we need to talk." I turned to face him, this man who'd shared my bed for 3 years, who'd whispered sweet words in my ear every night while plotting to destroy me financially. "What could we possibly have to talk about, David?" "Look, I know I said some things in there that were harsh. I was angry, I wasn't thinking clearly." "You mean when you admitted that our entire relationship was a con job? When you confessed that you targeted me for my money before we even met? When you revealed that every loving moment between us was an act?" He winced. "It wasn't all an act. I did develop feelings for you, but not enough to not try to steal from me. It wasn't stealing." His voice rose again, then he caught himself and lowered it. "Look, we're married. In a marriage, people share things. I just wanted us to have a fair arrangement." The rewriting of history was breathtaking. Even now, caught red-handed, he was trying to make his attempted theft sound reasonable. "A fair arrangement would have been you getting a job that could support the lifestyle you wanted instead of planning to rob your wife," I replied. "I never meant for it to get this complicated," he said, running his hands through his hair. "Jessica, Marcus, all this legal stuff, it just spiraled out of control." "You mean your affair spiraled out of control? Your plan to steal millions of dollars spiraled out of control." "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry it went this far. But can't we work something out? I mean, you don't need all that money. You could never spend it all anyway." Even in his desperation, David still thought he deserved access to my inheritance. Still thought I owed him something for 3 years of lies. "David, I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "Our marriage is over. You will get nothing from me. No money, no property, no ongoing support. You signed a prenup that protects my separate property, remember? The one you insisted on to prove your love wasn't about money." His face crumpled as he remembered the prenuptial agreement he'd encouraged me to sign, thinking it would make him look noble while actually protecting the assets he planned to steal through different means. "But I have nothing," he whispered. "My business failed. I spent everything I had on that apartment with Jessica. I have no savings. What am I supposed to do?" "I suggest you get a job," I said, walking toward my car. "Amelia, please," he called after me. "I know I messed up, but you can't just leave me with nothing." I stopped and turned back one last time. "David, you're not leaving with nothing. You're leaving with exactly what you brought to this marriage: your lies, your manipulations, and your complete lack of integrity." That seems fair to me. That was the last conversation I ever had with my ex-husband. But the consequences were just beginning. Over the next few weeks, David's life completely fell apart. Without the financial windfall he'd been counting on, he couldn't afford the expensive Pearl District apartment. Jessica had already moved out the day after the mediation, apparently finding someone new with better financial prospects. David's family launched a social media campaign against me that was both vicious and absurd. His mother posted long Facebook rants about how I'd stolen my own inheritance to prevent David from getting his fair share as a husband. "After 3 years of marriage, that money should be half his," she wrote. "Amelia is a selfish, vindictive woman who led my son on and then destroyed his life when he asked for what he deserved." His sister joined in with Instagram posts calling me a gold-digging trust fund baby who had used and discarded her brother. The irony of calling me a gold digger for protecting my own money from an actual gold digger was apparently lost on her. But the social media attacks backfired spectacularly when someone, probably Rebecca, though she never admitted it, leaked some of the audio recordings of David and Jessica planning their scheme. Suddenly, David's family's narrative crumbled as people heard him in his own words discussing how to take Amelia for everything she's worth. The comments sections turned brutal. "Your son is a con artist who targeted a grieving woman for her money. This isn't about fairness, this is about a failed scam. Maybe teach your son to get a job instead of trying to steal from his wife." David's professional reputation was destroyed almost overnight. Word spread quickly through Portland's financial advisor community about what he'd attempted. His business license was investigated after several complaints about ethics violations. No reputable firm would hire him. Marcus faced his own professional consequences. The Oregon State Bar launched an ethics investigation after learning about his role in coaching David's scheme. Several of his corporate clients quietly moved their business elsewhere when the story became public. Jessica lost her job at Marcus's firm within a week of the mediation. Apparently, being involved in a conspiracy to defraud someone is frowned upon in the legal profession, even for paralegals. Meanwhile, my life improved dramatically. The vineyard had its best season in years. Without the constant stress of wondering if my husband was plotting against me, I had energy to focus on expansion plans, new wine varieties, and marketing strategies that attracted new customers from across the Pacific Northwest. My work performance improved too. My marketing campaigns started winning industry awards, and I received a promotion with a substantial salary increase. It's amazing how much more creative and productive you can be when you're not spending mental energy wondering if someone's betraying you. But the best part was the peace. Coming home to a house that was truly mine, sleeping soundly without wondering what secrets the person next to me was keeping, making financial decisions based on what was best for me and my future rather than worrying about someone else's hidden agenda. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, David made one last desperate attempt to contact me. He showed up at the vineyard on a Saturday afternoon, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. His expensive clothes had been replaced with discount store basics, his car was gone, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd lost everything. I was in the tasting room when Emma, who was visiting for the weekend, came to find me. "David's here," she said. "He's asking to talk to you." I found him sitting on the front porch where my grandmother used to sit every evening, watching the sunset over the vineyard. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. He looked broken, defeated, genuinely remorseful. "I lost everything," he said without looking at me. "My business, my apartment, my reputation. Jessica won't even return my calls. My own family is embarrassed to be associated with me." I sat down on the porch swing, keeping distance between us. I'm sorry your life didn't work out the way you planned, I said, and meant it. I'd never wanted to destroy him, just protect myself. I know you probably don't believe this, but I did love you, he said, finally looking at me. Maybe not at first, maybe not the way I should have, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. But not enough to not try to steal from me, I replied quietly. He was silent for a long time, staring out at the vineyard. I was scared, he finally said. Scared I wasn't good enough for you, wasn't successful enough. Marcus kept telling me I deserved half of everything, that it was my right as your husband. And Jessica. Jessica made me feel important, like I was this powerful, successful man instead of the guy whose wife paid for everything. David, if you had just talked to me about feeling insecure, about wanting to contribute more to our partnership, we could have worked something out. I would have helped you build your business, supported your career, anything. Instead, you chose to plan my financial destruction. I know, he whispered. I know I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Is there any chance, any possibility that you could forgive me? That we could try again? I looked at this man who had once made me believe in fairy tale love, who had held me while I grieved, who had promised to cherish and protect me. And I felt something I hadn't expected, not love, not hate, but a kind of sad pity. I do forgive you, David, I said, and realized it was true. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm willing to give you another chance to hurt me. He nodded, tears running down his cheeks. I understand. I had to ask. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know. Maybe leave Portland, start over somewhere else. Try to rebuild some kind of life. He stood up slowly, like an old man, though he was only 36. For what it's worth, you were right to protect yourself. I'm glad you figured out what I was planning. You deserve better than what I was going to do to you. He walked his beat-up Honda, apparently his BMW had been repossessed, and drove away. I never saw him again. That evening, as Emma and I sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the vineyard gold, she asked, "Do you ever regret it? Protecting yourself instead of trusting him?" I thought about it for a long time. No, I finally said. I regret that I married someone capable of such betrayal. I regret that the love I thought we shared was largely an illusion. But I don't regret protecting my grandmother's legacy and my own future. Good, Emma said, raising her glass. To smart women who trust their instincts. To smart women, I agreed, who know the difference between love and a business transaction. That was 1.5 years ago. The divorce has been finalized for over 1 year now, and my life is better than it's ever been. The vineyard is thriving. We've expanded our production, won several regional wine awards, and built a loyal customer base that comes not just for the wine, but for the story of resilience and family legacy. I'm in a new relationship now with someone who knew me before he knew about my money. James was actually a customer at the vineyard for years before we started dating. He'd come for tastings, bring friends, attend our harvest festivals. When I finally told him about David and everything that had happened, his response was simple: "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself." That took real courage. The thing is, going through David's betrayal taught me something crucial about relationships and boundaries. You can love someone deeply and still protect yourself. You can be generous with your heart without being foolish with your resources. Some people will tell you that if you really love someone, you should trust them completely, share everything, hold nothing back. But here's what I learned the hard way. Real love doesn't demand access to everything you have. Real love protects you. It doesn't plot against you. If someone truly loves you, they won't see your assets as their opportunity. They won't research your financial situation before deciding whether you're worth pursuing. They won't spend months or years planning how to take half of everything you've worked for or inherited. Love doesn't come with a price tag. And if someone is treating your relationship like an investment they expect a return on, that's not love. That's a business transaction with emotional manipulation thrown in to make it more effective. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your relationship, investigate. Don't let anyone make you feel paranoid, crazy, or guilty for protecting yourself. The right person will respect your boundaries, not try to break them down. And remember, You don't owe anyone access to your resources, especially people who see you as a resource rather than a person they love and cherish. My grandmother always used to say, protect what matters and you'll never lose what's important. It took me almost losing everything to understand what she really meant. The vineyard, the money, the assets, those were just things. What really mattered was my self-respect, my ability to trust my own judgment, and my refusal to let anyone take advantage of my loving nature. David took a lot from me. 3 years of my life, my faith in love, my ability to trust easily. But he didn't take what mattered most. He didn't take my strength, my intelligence, or my grandmother's legacy. And in the end, that's what saved me. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this incredible journey. Stories like these show us the importance of trusting our instincts, protecting ourselves, and never feeling guilty for having good boundaries. If this story moved you, made you think about your own relationships, or just entertained you for the last hour, hitting that subscribe button, giving this video a thumbs up, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this message would mean everything to me. Comment below and let me know, have you ever had to choose between love and self-protection? How did it turn out? What would you have done in Amelia's situation? I read every single comment and your stories inspire the content I create. Hit that notification bell too, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. I have some absolutely wild stories lined up that will make this one look tame. Thank you for being part of this community, and remember, you're worth protecting. Always.